Welcome to the 105. I'm Cooper Petagna. That's 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. And last night, we got our first look at the college football playoff rankings. Drew, I don't know about you. I mean, kind of legendary in terms of dropping the first look at the rankings on election night. I mean, if you want to find a way to kind of deflect from any type of criticism, it's a good time to do it. I don't know if they were thinking that far ahead in that process, but Drew, we have the first look at the college football playoff rankings. So we're going to bring up the bracket here for those of you viewing on YouTube. And Drew, the group of five representative, how about Boise State, the 12 seed? They would technically be in Columbus at Ohio State in the first round. You have a matchup between Indiana, Tennessee in Rocky Top, Alabama in Texas, showdown in the SEC in Austin. Notre Dame would travel to Happy Valley. And then the buys here, you see Georgia, the number 2 seed, Miami, the number 3 seed, Oregon, the number 1 seed, BYU, the number 4 seed. So, Drew, we're going to talk about some overarching type of themes, I guess, in the college football playoff. But just looking at that bracket, is there anything that kind of stands out to you, or maybe gets you a little bit excited about one of those kind of non-con first round matchups, and just matchups we don't really get to see that quite often?
Well, Coop, it might have been election night, but it was Maction night in the Ivins household. First Tuesday night of the MAC here in November. You got to get fired up for that, right? I mean, nothing really jumps out to me. I feel like the college football playoff, I mean, it's discussed pretty much everywhere. I mean, I don't know if that's our lane to kind of go through the handicapping of who should be where. BYU, got to give a shout out to my boy Kalani Sitake, undefeated in there. So I think there's a lot of football left, right? And I think this weekend you essentially got an elimination game between LSU and Alabama. I'm fired up for that. That's appointment television for myself. So I do like how we have created these matchups, right, throughout the month of November, and it'll bleed into December, where you got to watch, right? Like something is on the line there. And, that rivalry, I know you're going to be tuned in with LSU there. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, first three out, 13 through 15, SMU. We'll talk a little bit about them. Texas A&M at 14, and then LSU at 15. You mentioned the head-to-head between LSU and Alabama. Certainly going to set the stage for the rest of the season about which one of those SEC teams could potentially get in there. But Drew, let's talk about Oregon, right? I mean, this is a team not too long ago when Dan Lanning took over. We're trying to figure out what the direction of this program would be. You're talking about a disciple of Kirby Smart. You fast forward the clock 2.5 cycles later, and then 9 weeks or 10 weeks in to the 2024 season, Drew, Oregon's ranked number 1. And you think about Dan Lanning and what he's done. He's 31-5 in 2.5 years as the head man there in Eugene. Last time Oregon reached the college football playoff, well, that was in the first year of its existence in 2014 under Mark Helfrich. I got a lot of thoughts here, Drew, just kind of looking back through their classes from their initial class in 22 to what they've done in 23 and 24. But to me, I guess I'll just kind of set the stage here. When you kind of look at the new way of college football and where it's trending between NIL, the transfer portal, the 12-team playoff, and now with a key player in Nick Saban out of the picture, it's kind of shifted a little bit of the power dynamic here. And for me, I'm looking at the cream of the crop, the top of the top here for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, and a lot can change in that time. But this is kind of how I see it. Georgia, Kirby Smart, Texas, Steve Sarkisian, Ohio State, Ryan Day, they've proved that. And Oregon and Dan Lanning, I mean, what he has done and proved in short order, Drew, that they're right now are going to run the table and potentially win the Big Ten championship. And have already gone through Ohio State and Michigan. And we've talked about it. They have the most physical roster in that league from year one. I just think the foundation is strong, and it's only getting better and better.
Yeah, I would agree. Is there like a place where we can wager Oregon college football playoff futures in 2025, 2026, and beyond? This is our lane. I think we can talk about this. We see the players that are headed to Eugene. We know how Dan Lanning is going to close here for the 2025 recruiting cycle, right? They only got, a dozen or so commitments. They're going to get multiple 5 stars, I think, right? They have some 5-star candidates out there. Cooper, the big thing I have here, right, when you look at Oregon long-term, right, I do think you can just kind of pencil them in for the next few college football playoffs because that quarterback room, it's in a good spot. They got Dante Moore or Austin Novosad that they're going to take over post Dylan Gabriel, who's making a run at the Heisman Trophy. But my big question, right, how does Oregon keep this thing humming? I think it's going to come down to Dan Lanning keeping that staff together. And if you go back to 2022, when he first took over, he comes in from Georgia. A lot of those staff members were on that initial kind of hiring spree, right? Those guys haven't left. So we see it all the time. You have this success. People want your assistant coaches. They want your coordinators. They go on to be head coaches at other places. And Dan Lanning hasn't had to deal with that just yet. Will Stein, the OC, I think he's a play caller that maybe some schools get interested in. But to me, that's really the only thing, because when you also, Cooper, look at the non-conference schedule for Oregon moving forward, they have a home and home with Oklahoma State, and that's really it for the next 2 seasons. And Oklahoma State, tons of questions about Mike Gundy and the long-term trajectory of that program right now. So to me, Oregon, can he keep the same people in the building? And if they do leave, who does he replace them with? Because I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to be a part of what's going on there in Eugene.
I want to give some kudos to not only Dan Lanning and his staff, Marshall Malkow, who oversees the personnel roster construction of Oregon. Drew, it's kind of interesting to me the last 3 years in terms of what they've done. You brought up the point that they had a top 5 class last year in 2024. Right now, inside the top 10, a couple things could fall their way. Maybe they surge into the top 5 here late. They typically finish strong. But you look at the way that they have built this, and they've been aggressive in the transfer portal. They took in the initial class in 2022, they signed 17 high school players, 10 transfers. The next year, 29 high school players, 16 transfers. This last year, 26 high school players, 14 transfers. And then you look at a top 5 class where barely any of these freshmen are playing. So what you're doing is you're kind of allowing these guys to develop on their own timeline by going out there, being able to be aggressive in the transfer portal market. And we know the funding there and at Oregon is strong. We're going to talk about some other teams that I think this kind of relates to as well. But I think Dan Lanning, Oregon, what they've done from a roster building standpoint, it's super fascinating. I mean, look at this combination in 2022. Josh Connerly, 5-star offensive tackle. Devin Jackson that they win from Nebraska, playing well for them. Jordan James that they flip late. Justice Lowe, Bucky Irvin, Christian Gonzalez, Taki Taimani, Bo Nix, right? So you think about that high school element mixed in with the transfer element. The next year, Mateo Uaongalale, Kenyon Sadiq, Tatum Tuioti, Jordan Birch, Tej Johnson, Tracian Holden, Ajani Cornelius, Kyrie Jackson, Justin Jacobs, Dylan Gabriel, Peyton Woodyard, Derek Harmon, Kobe Savage, Dante Moore, Jabbar Muhammad, Jamari Caldwell, Evan Stewart, Matthew Bedford. Talk about just being lights out in terms of what they've been able to do via the transfer portal over the last 3 cycles. And then you splinter that in with elite level high school talent. Drew, I mean, talk about a way of not only making you competitive in really short order, but you're building for the long term as well. They're getting the best of both worlds here.
Yeah, and maybe I've kind of missed it. I don't know. It's been talked on like Fox's Big Noon Kick. I don't know if Josh Pate has talked about this, but I don't think they get enough credit for the hits in the transfer portal. You said it. I mean, you could go past the past 3 transfer windows. Like those guys are playing, and you have to feel confident. Like Dan Lanning doesn't get the portal king billing, but maybe he should because he's got those impact players.
All right. The one thing that I brought up, Phil Knight, incredibly motivated to win a championship there at Oregon and Eugene and bring a college football playoff trophy back to the University of Oregon. Another program that's extremely motivated right now and sitting inside the top 13 at number 13 in the college football playoff rankings. How about SMU, man? And this is a team that's 8-1. The only loss that they have on the season is at home to BYU in what I believe is a 1-score game, Drew. And this is a team that gave up 9 years of TV revenue in the ACC, over $200 million. So nobody's questioning their commitment to winning as well. It's pretty interesting, but we kind of wanted to look at this through the scope of teams who had the most to gain being in this conversation, Drew. You look at just kind of the layout of not only the ACC, but look at the schools in Texas, outside of Texas and Texas A&M, and kind of how that it sets up a little bit. TCU, Baylor, Houston, Texas Tech. Drew, the only team ranked in front of them right now from a recruiting standpoint out of those schools that I mentioned is TCU, and they're up by 2 spots, and they have the head-to-head on the field this year. So SMU, man, like in my opinion, a lot to gain here. I think they can continue to kind of to work up the college football hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a bracketologist with the CFP, but I do think they kind of control their own destiny here. Boston College, Virginia, Cal to close out the season could be in the ACC title game. And you said it right, Cooper, last second field goal early on in the season. That's when they fell to BYU. So they could be undefeated. I think the biggest thing when you look at SMU, okay, what's next? Rhett Lashley, does he have any reason to leave there? I don't think so. Now, they're going to have to reload. If you look at kind of the starting 22, 14 of them are graduates or seniors. They went heavy on the transfer portal last year, finished 107th in high school recruiting. They only took 9 individuals, again, used a lot of counters on the veterans. That's paying off here on the field. But the thing is, right now, number 25 in the class of 2025 rankings with a month to go. And I think the quarterback position is kind of settled long-term. Obviously, Kevin Jennings is having a sound year. You got him for 2 more years. You think he's going to improve in Lashley's offensive system. And then they got Ty Hawkins, who's committed at IMG Academy, a quarterback inside our top 247. The other thing, Cooper, they got a new $100 million football facility there. I haven't been, but I heard it's awesome, right? State of the art. I think a lot of players like that. And then you got to credit the Boulevard Collective. That's SMU's boosters, the alumni, all of them right there. You know, On3 reported 2 years ago that the Boulevard was paying all SMU players $36,000 annually. You wonder what that number is right now, but they have the NIL budget to go out there and compete. And the last note I got down here, hey, let's not forget our guy, Keelan Russell, top 3 player in the country. He was committed to SMU for a long time. So they also want to identify talent on the recruiting trail. I think the Mustangs and Lashley, De'Aaron King, the quarterback coach there, gave Keelan Russell a lot to think about. He ultimately flipped to Alabama, but they were in the mix. SMU, which at the time was moving into the ACC, in the mix for one of the nation's top talents. Coop, I cannot hear you. We are having some microphone issues, I'm assuming.
All right. Am I back?
Yeah, you just ruined my entire video cut rolling on SMU there.
Well, it happens. I'm sorry.
All good.
Real quick, what I was going to say in 2022 is that Rhett Lashley comes in, and it's a very different build than what we talked about Dan Lanning in Oregon. We're talking about a program transitioning from Group of 5 to Power 4 very quickly. So how do they build it? They rank 82nd, Drew, but they only take 13 kids from high school. They take 17 players in the transfer portal. The next year, 26 players in the transfer portal. The year after that, 2024, 21. Now you look at what they're doing in 2025. They're kind of flipping the script. They already have 23 commitments, and they've kind of built it now up to a point. Now they're in the Power 4. It's a little bit inverted. You kind of see them hedging their bet. They're going to go back to high school, supplement via the transfer portal. But not all these teams are equal. I think the other thing that you and I always talk about, unless you're Oregon, unless you're Miami, you're kind of year to year in the portal. Oregon's had a ton of success. SMU's had a ton of success. But it is risky business as well because you don't know what the market's going to look like every year. So you have to circumvent that build through high school as well. So I think SMU, a little bit of a vibe shift right now in terms of how they're putting their roster together, but they've done a tremendous job, and they've kind of been 1 or 2 steps ahead of this entire process. All right, Drew, the next team we want to talk about, Notre Dame, sitting there at number 10. And, you know, I want to kind of get your thought in terms of, like, if you're Notre Dame, you're surrounded by Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. How do you separate, if you're Marcus Freeman, from the rest of this group, really kind of from like a credibility standpoint on the recruiting trail? Like, what does Marcus Freeman have to do in your eyes where Notre Dame is now like a cut above or in the same conversation as maybe in Ohio State?
I think you're kind of seeing it on the recruiting trail, right? Big weekend on deck for the Irish. Derek Meadows expected to be in South Bend, top 50 talent, wide receiver. This is a guy they've been on throughout the process. But to me, what's really stood out here kind of down the home stretch on the recruiting front is Notre Dame is chipping away. Usually they assemble that recruiting class, and they're trying to fight to hold on to guys as they get closer and closer to that signing period. But I mean, they flip Antavius Richardson, a two-way athlete out of the state of Georgia. They're in it on this kid, Antoine Parham, a Tulane commit from South Florida. I mean, the fact that Notre Dame is going down there and looking at a kid like him, it shows to me that, hey, they are trying to get the elite best of the best athletes. So to me, I thought coming into the year, 12-team playoff, Notre Dame had the most to gain there. Now they need to kick it into overdrive, right? They need to finish on the recruiting front. They need to get these individuals. Another name they're in on, Andrew Olesh, the tight end committed to Michigan. We talk about him all the time, our number 3 tight end. Notre Dame, I mean, they have a lot to offer him. So to me, you look at them potentially being in the playoff. And then Cooper, I mean, they're going to be in the national conversation next year. Open the season against Miami, face Texas A&M again. How about they go to Arkansas? Boise State's on the schedule. I mean, Notre Dame has put themselves where they are in the spotlight moving forward. So very interested to see how they round out this year.
Yeah, we have national recruiting analyst Tom Loy in the chat, as he mentions here. Big weekend recruiting-wise for Notre Dame as they look to flip top 247 receiver Derek Meadows from LSU. You also have Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng from IMG Academy, Madden Faramo as well, 2 linebackers that we're really, really high on. So Notre Dame setting up for a strong finish, Drew. I kind of have them in the same category as Penn State. Like, to me, it's just kind of like 1 or 2 chess moves away from kind of getting over the top. And I love what Notre Dame has done on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I love what they've done at the second level. They've recruited the secondary well. Defensively, they kind of seem set to me. Offensively, what they have to do at that receiver position, very, very similar to Penn State. What puts them over the edge in that quarterback play, I think, has to be elite. Now, Drew, going from 4 to 12, I expect Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, to be in this CFP conversation year in and year out. And I think that's pretty fair to say here, Drew.
Here's a question for you, right? Like, I've been thinking about this. Nick Marsh, the freshman at Michigan State, that was a kid that came out of Michigan. You know, you look at the receiver play at Penn State, you look at the receiver play at Michigan, the Wolverines, you look at the receiver play for Notre Dame, and it's like, how did everyone not go on this individual? And I know he wasn't a 5-star prospect for us, but like, that's a kid in your backyard. Is this a case where everyone's overthinking it? To me, just the Achilles for these programs, the difference makers on the outside, I don't get it.
I think sometimes it's really easy when you're a program like Notre Dame and Michigan. We had this issue as well. You're a national program, right? So you can get distracted by going out there and out west, or you can go any corner of the country and everybody's going to pick up the phone. Everybody's going to answer the door because of the brand that you have and the brand that you're associated with. And, you know, when I interviewed with Texas A&M a long time ago with Kevin Sumlin, I remember him saying, we were talking about, all right, philosophically, what is your general idea of recruiting out west in California? He said, every time I jump on a plane and I visit a player in California, I'm reminded of all the players as I look out the window that we're passing up to go get that player. And I think that is a stark reminder for some of these programs that, hey, you're kind of going to build the foundation of who you are really in the Midwest. And that's where you have to live. That's going to be the core foundation of how you build your team. We've seen Ohio State get back to that. Yeah, they've had to really kind of add a little bit of sizzle in terms of their skill position, maybe going down to Florida to go get a guy like Jeremiah Smith or Brandon Ennis, whatever it is. There's going to be times where it's going to call for that, but I agree with it. A guy like Nick Marsh is a really good recruitment to kind of go back to and say, hold on, how did Michigan miss this guy? How did Notre Dame miss this guy? These are both teams that got to get more dynamic at the receiver position. And he's a guy right there, honestly, that they shouldn't miss. Drew, another team that I want to talk about here that's pretty interesting to me is Miami. And the more that I studied Miami, the more that I thought, wow, Dan Lanning and Mario Cristobal are pretty similar just in terms of how they're building this thing. Maybe not the track record so far, but recently, just in terms of what Mario has done in the transfer portal. I mean, you think about that initial year as well, right, Drew? 15 guys via high school, 11 in the portal. The guys that came, Akeem Messidor, Wesley Basaint, Isaiah Horton, Inez Cooper, right? So you're thinking about 4 or 5 starters out of that group that Mario Cristobal was able to land in short order. I just think that initial transition class is so important right? Like for the foundation of your team over the next 2 to 3 years, you got to be able to come away with a couple multi-year starters. Then you think about the combination of the other guys: Cam McCormick, Matt Lee, who started for him, Kika Malinois, Javion Cohen, Francis Malinois, Ruben Bain, Mark Fletcher, Riley Williams, Chris Johnson, Emory Williams. This year, Tyler Barron, Simeon Barrow, Sam Brown, Deani Hill, Damian Martinez, Mish Powell, Cam Ward, Zach Carpenter, Saquon Patterson, Elijah Lofton, Jordan Lyle, Markel Bell, OJ Frederick. The thing that just kind of popped into my head like a light bulb to me is I know you and I have had some conversations with some teams at the tippy top, right? And how they look at high school players. And they don't look at them the same way that you and I do. Our job is to project these guys out to Sunday. Their job is to win on Saturdays. And you look at this combination of guys that are just built, ready to play right out of the gate: Malinois, Ruben Bain, Mark Fletcher. I mean, you go down the list. Elijah Lofton, right? Saquon Patterson starting to get some run. It's pretty fascinating how you look at an Oregon and you look at a Miami, and you kind of see them starting to form an identity of playing a complementary game between high school and the transfer portal with guys that are just ready to play, and then loading the back end of their class, 2/3 of it, with guys now that have the opportunity to sit. And the money part is important because Miami and Oregon, as far as I understand, you're talking about two of the most competitive programs in the country when it comes to NIL. Not only can they go acquire top-end talent, but they can retain it. So it all comes down to, how do you really view player development? And now Miami and Oregon are kind of sitting there in a really, really opportune situation where, you know, the guys that are physically ready to play out of high school, they play them early. They don't have to deal with those guys maybe thinking about entering the transfer portal. And the guys that aren't, well, they're getting compensated. Now they have an opportunity to learn, and they're playing for a winning program as well. It's interesting to me to kind of watch this play out in real life.
It seems like the ideal mix, blend, whatever word you want to use. And I'm interested to see if other people copy it. And the thing about playing all those freshmen you've mentioned, they rolled Francis Malinois out there. You can go into these recruitments, these NIL recruitments for these huge players, and you can point to the fact that, hey, we are not afraid to play some true freshmen. And you can point to other programs around the country. I know Georgia plays freshmen and Texas plays some freshmen, but Miami can pitch the fact and it be true that, hey, no, we actually play these blue chip guys. You will get the opportunity to meet. Cooper, just kind of doing a diagnosis of Miami right now and looking ahead to what's next. And obviously Cam Ward has unlocked a ton for the Hurricanes there. He has been a cheat code. He has transformed that offense. Quarterback's my only real question mark kind of moving forward. I mean, you look at the two deep, and I know they're going to lose Xavier Restrepo. I know they're going to lose Jacoby George. They got like 4 or 5 senior defensive linemen that are going to be on their way out. But you know they're going to be in the transfer portal for those guys. I believe in the wide receivers on the roster that aren't playing right now. A guy like JoJo Trader, I think he's going to be ready to go in 2025. My question is, Miami has tasted the high life, a game-changing quarterback. And yes, Reese Poffenberger will be in the mix next season. Emory Williams will be in the mix next season. He has started 2 games. But to me, Cooper, it's like you're traveling, right? You go to one of these airport lounges. You experience, the food, the drinks, all that. You fly. And then the next time you go to the airport, right, you don't have that lounge access. It kind of takes away from the experience. Once you taste it, you want it. So does Miami go out there and they look for the best of the best? Because I think that is the one question mark off the hoof, right? When you look at the roster, okay, what is going to be the plan at quarterback in 2025?
I mean, you just never know what the market's going to look like, right? Miami could go from Cam Ward, a potential Heisman Trophy winner, top 10 pick, to the market looking like, and I'm not saying this is like doomsday scenario, to the market looking like Connor Wigman, potentially Jackson Arnold, maybe a Miller Moss, maybe a Jaden Maeva to kind of see what it plays out like over the next couple of weeks. That's the hard part. But that being said, Miami's in a super interesting position because they now have the blueprint, right? They can go out there and say, hey, look at what we have done from a roster building standpoint. The only position that really needs to be plug and play is quarterback. And the only team that right now they're kind of competing with that has that same track record, Oregon. You had Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix, right? It's all laid out there. So if I was Mario, sure, you want to continue to take high developmental upside guys at the quarterback position. But man, they're sitting in a top 3 spot to have the right of first refusal after this year, year after year. If I'm Mario Cristobal, I got to find a way to keep that going, right? So that's kind of the interesting part about how the dominoes have kind of fallen here for Mario so far. All right, guys, just a reminder, you are locked in to the 105, and you can find us on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. You can also find all wall-to-wall team coverage on 247sports.com. That includes recruiting rankings and transfer portal updates as well, which, if you know anything about the transfer portal, we are not too far away from that thing getting ready to start humming. Drew, now it is time for some signing day preview superlatives. I believe we are less than 30 days out. Do we have a count? What are we, 29, 28, something like that? Signing day, what, December 4th? Does that sound right?
I think that sounds right, Cooper. Baby Ivins is due the same week, so I know we are approaching. I know we are approaching quickly. Doctor's appointments have been ramped up here, so yes, we are in the home stretch. Not only for signing day, but
what are you excited more for, a signing day or Baby Ivins?
Baby Ivins, come on, man. and some.
I was trying to get you in trouble. All right, let's talk about some sneaky good classes. We've been doing these class breakdowns that you can find on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Our goal is to hit all 67 Power 4 teams. That's a lot going on, but if you like 10-minute breakdowns, kind of the nuts and bolts of the class and how they came together, like I said, you can find that on the 105 playlist on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. But Drew, I'm going to give you the tee box here. Sneaky good class. Who you got?
I got Washington, man. And I know you used to work there. You helped construct the Huskies roster, the one that broke through in the college football playoff. I look at this group, Cooper, and I get fired up. I think I told you and Tom Loy yesterday when we were getting ready to do the Washington one, I see all these 3 stars. I see all the, green numbers on Next Gen. It's just like, guys, there could be some NFL players in here. Jedd Fisch, he didn't really have an initial recruiting class. Remember, he was a late hire coming over from Arizona to Washington. Huskies this season, 5-4 on the field, but they got wins over Michigan and USC. Going to finish against Penn State, UCLA, and Oregon. So hopefully they're in a bowl game. But I really, really like this group, Cooper, because it reminds me of what Jedd Fisch did when he first took over at Arizona and turned things around there. That initial recruiting class for Jedd Fisch there with the Wildcats, it's going to have potentially 4 top 100 draft picks. Only one of those guys was a top 247 prospect for us, and that was T-Mac. I see dudes with developmental upside in this Washington recruiting class that ranks 18th right now. And really, I think it's a foundational group. Starts in the trenches on the offensive line. I think they got 4 guys, multi-year starter upside in the Big Ten. Zach Statskowski, the offensive tackle, inside the top 247. Really like him. Washington's going to need to hold on there, but they got Jack Schaefer, Jake Flores. I think this group is going to be just like the same group that Jedd Fisch initially got at Arizona. So I love that. And then the DB class, man, it is loaded with difference makers to me. I know you're a big fan of Dylan Robinson. Heard from someone at Washington last night that they might actually play him on both sides of the football. Took him as a corner, open to the idea of him playing some wide receiver. And, Travis Hunter, I think, has kind of transformed how some of these programs think in terms of two-way players. Not saying this guy's going to play, 113 snaps every Saturday, but I think he's someone where they're actually open to the idea of him on both sides of the ball. Ryland Dillard Allen, love him as a safety that they got out of Arizona. And then the wide receivers. Washington needs to revamp that room. Remember what they lost last year? A lot of guys making plays now in the NFL. They love Raiden Vines-Bright at IMG Academy, dinged up with a collarbone, but I think that dude can roll. So I'm fired up about this group. And the other thing, Cooper, they got 2 quarterbacks committed. Not a lot of recruiting classes out there with 2 quarterbacks from the high school ranks. Damon Williams, if you listen to the 105, you follow the 105, he's going to be the dude for Washington moving forward, but they know they had to build some depth behind him. 2 quarterbacks in the boat. And I just love that. Hey, a program out there that's not going to try to do it all through the transfer portal, going to take some guys from the high school ranks. Just think what they've done once you open up the hood and look at this Washington recruiting class. I think it's going to set them up for success in the Big Ten. Might not come here in 2025, but 2026, 2027, we're going to be talking about a lot of these guys that they signed here this upcoming December.
Got a comment in the chat from Drew. He says, "Go UW. Fish is a maniacal recruiter." Jed Fish, man, I think he has outperformed all expectations just in terms of what I thought from a program management standpoint. What he did at Arizona, what he's doing at Washington now. He's got a good group around him, man. Matt Doherty, Drew, that a friend of ours and a friend of the show, and a guy who's done a tremendous job and deserves a lot of recognition for the job that he did at Arizona, now the job that he's doing at UW. Jed Fish, high expectations. He said he wanted to have the highest ranked recruiting class in Washington. I think he's going to get there. I think he's going to be pretty close. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but it will be soon. He's doing a tremendous job. Drew, for me, I'm going to go with Missouri, right? And this team has just been uptick. And, I always talk about, can recruiting match the progress of what you're doing on the field? And there's kind of like this huge opportunity there that some teams, they look up, they're 4, they're 5-0, and they're like, man, we just haven't had that same type of emphasis on the recruiting trail. And it doesn't match really the success that we're having on the field. That's not the case with Missouri. And what I like about Missouri is coming off the year that they had last year, they've continued to ramp it up. And I just kind of love what Eli Drinkwitz has done. You look at their class, Matt Zollers, one of the standouts there. Drew, been banged up this year, gruesome lower extremity injury in the beginning of the season, a little bit up and down. We talked about him yesterday on the class breakdown from Missouri. But ultimately a guy, if he gets the time to sit and develop, I love this kid for Eli Drinkwitz. Other guys who look at, 5-star offensive tackle, Lamont Rogers, big kid that has every elite physical spec that you could possibly dream of. If he sticks with Missouri, you think about Missouri pairing him and Jack Lang. It kind of reminds me of maybe not to this degree, but you think about like Will Campbell and Emory Jones and having those 2 tackles to anchor your offensive line in the SEC. That's a really big deal. Donovan Olobode, you're thinking about Luther Burden. What happens after that? What happens after Theo Weiss? Well, now you got one of the more day one ready receivers in the country to step in as well, man. I talked about Henry Fanuku, an offensive lineman that I like, Keaton Jones as well, Manford, another kid, Drew, your guy, Sean Terry as well. This is just a very, very well put together class for Missouri. And Missouri's going to be one of those teams you're going to have to watch out for. I think from this point forward, it's going to be closer to 15 than it is going to be 25 for them.
I think they're just kind of one of these thorns in the side. If you're another school in the SEC, right? There's not going to be much of a changing of the guard at the top, but I think Missouri is just going to be one of these programs over the next few seasons where it's like you don't want to have to play them, right? You don't want to have to 11 a.m. in Columbia because they're going to have the talent. They also get it done in the transfer portal. So I love this pick, Cooper. Matt Zollers, he's also been linked to Penn State. Got to hold on to him, but that recruiting class. And what I like about Missouri, we saw it a little bit last cycle as well. They do a good job in the show me state, but then they go into these other regions where you wouldn't expect Missouri to really recruit, right? They're in Alabama. They've gone into Louisiana. Lamont Rogers is from Texas. I'll never forget last year when we were in Fort Lauderdale for the signing day show, driving home on I-95, and Missouri had a billboard celebrating their signees in South Florida, the Missouri Tigers. I have not seen another school that's done that, and I thought that was kind of cool.
I mean this with all due respect, but when you're a team like Missouri that's trying to climb the mountain and be one of the perennial teams, not only in the SEC, but in the country, you have to think differently, right? You have to be creative. You have to be innovative. You have to find different ways, different pathways to get into areas of the country that you haven't been able to get to before. And I think when you elevate guys like Luther Burden, I think when you land guys like Williams Nwaneri, they've done a tremendous job in the state of Missouri. I think they're starting to really kind of, I don't want to say build a fence, but those guys are forced to look home before looking anywhere else. And that's the way that it should be in Mizzou. So credit to Eli Drinkwitz, Missouri, Jed Fish as well. 2 sneaky classes ranked inside the top 20, if you want to call them that, but Missouri, Washington, getting it done on the recruiting trail. Drew, polarizing recruitment. I, for one, am not shocked by your answer because I feel like we talk about this guy every show. But you love him, which is important, right? So that means we can roll back the tape when he's balling out here in a year from now.
Yeah, well, we didn't get many parameters to this prompt. I think Bryce Underwood would be an obvious answer. Number one ranked player in the class, longtime LSU commit. He's been linked to Michigan here, but I didn't want to throw that one up there because I feel like everyone's talking about Bryce Underwood. So I wrote down Ivan Taylor, our number 2 ranked safety, doesn't have 5-star status, just outside the top 32. This is Ike Taylor's kid. And to me, why is it polarizing? Well, he was committed to Notre Dame. He flips to Michigan. Now Alabama is sniffing around. And if you want to spin it forward to next season, Michigan's going to lose their 2 starting safeties. Alabama is going to lose Malachi Moore. They have some issues in that secondary. And to me, Cooper, I could be seeing this completely wrong, okay? Watched a lot of Ivan Taylor footage. I think this guy is ready to go. I think he's one of the most complete players in the class. He can defend the run. He can defend the pass. I get it. He might not be the biggest individual, but to me, the IQ, the instincts, his feel, I think he's going to be on the field as a true freshman wherever he ends up in 2025. And for Michigan, it would be a statement to hold on to them. And for Alabama, that's a big add because he's someone that could play, kind of view him in that same light as like a Xavier Brown. And the other thing, Cooper, you look at the past 2 years, there has been a safety that has broken through as a true freshman. It was Caleb Downs 2 years ago. It's Coy Parrish this year. Not sure I would put Ivan Taylor in that category just yet. Let's see him at the Navy All-American Bowl in a few weeks. But I like this guy a lot. And to me, just how this shakes out here over the next few weeks, because I do think he's an individual that can contribute year one.
Real quick, because I want to ask you this, because this is, since I've known you, one of the players that you are the most convicted on. I would say, since we started doing this a couple years ago. Was there one moment in time throughout the evaluation process with him where you realized, like, all right, I'm all in on this kid?
Yeah, I mean, West Orange was playing LJ McCray in a spring jamboree. That would have been 2 years ago, right? So went to see, we needed to get eyes on LJ McCray out in Daytona Beach, stopped by the Buc-ee's out there on 95, and Ivan Taylor, I mean, just made 2 plays back-to-back in coverage, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is the dude. And then the other thing is, every time you watch him, right, I think, Cooper, when we get these prospects that you feel so convicted, you get fatigued. It's kind of like Jeremiah Smith last cycle. It's like, all right, you turn on the tape and you start second-guessing yourself at times, and then he's just so clean in my eyes. And it's funny, he played Dr. Phillips, his school, West Orange, did recently. One of my neighbors coaches at Dr. Phillips. I was like, oh, there's this kid, Ivan Taylor, there. And he was like, yeah, he's all right. I'm like, okay, well, I think he's the number 2 safety in the country. So I'll leave you with that. I think Ivan Taylor had a pretty nice night against them there in Orlando high school football.
Yeah, we shall see. All right, my polarizing recruitment, and this is kind of a little bit of a layup. Julian Lewis, who, Tom Loy is in the chat right now. He's been following this one for a while. Committed to USC since last year. And then you think about Indiana, they're going to get the visit against Michigan this weekend for Julian Lewis. You got Colorado out there as well. I can't figure this kid out, man. I really don't. And I'm not even talking about the football player. I think he's looking for a situation where he can step in and he can play from day one. And what you have to remember about Julian Lewis, talking about a guy that's played high level of competition for the last 3 years at Carrollton High School, and is reclassed from 26 to 25. And I actually think, he is one of those rare guys. He's very polished. Our biggest hang up on him when projecting him to Sundays has been the size. And obviously there's been a big turnoff with Bryce Young and his, I would say, lack of success in the NFL on Sundays. And you see Juju and you see, like, all right, this is what he is. Like, this is Julian Lewis. This is what you're going to get 3 or 4 years from now. This is what you're going to get from an arm talent standpoint. This is what you're going to get from a physical stature standpoint. So don't expect anything to change. That's okay. I think Julian Lewis is a high-level distributor and is going to be one of those guys that can step into a situation, whether it's Indiana, whether it's Colorado, and can play early. Drew, I just feel like, and this is a gut thing, or like what they say in the like last night when you're watching everything, like a vibe thing for me. It just feels like him, Deion Sanders, Colorado, Shador off to the NFL. I think you've always kind of wondered what's their plan, right, at quarterback. I think that's where he ultimately ends up, unless Indiana is able to kind of get this done. And I don't know how it's polling right now or what it really looks like and what are the chances USC even holds on to him. But at this point, I could see him going to Boulder, being able to have the opportunity to play early. Those guys playing better at the offensive line. They're surrounding him with a lot of skill talent. It's kind of a nice transition from a first-round draft pick at the quarterback position to a guy that allows you to kind of keep the confidence in the rest of the offensive unit, right? That there's not going to be a drop-off. And obviously there is. And it's going to be more of an experience thing than anything. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think this one is kind of like, I don't know, like I don't know how it's going to turn out, but in my gut, I kind of feel Colorado.
Tom Lloyd with the juice in the chat. We'll see if Julian shows up. The Saturday morning flight plans.
I mean, I read that article yesterday. You can't. I mean, I don't know.
So he's supposed to.
I guess it
he's
changed.
Supposed to visit Indiana this weekend. Is that correct?
I believe. At least that's what I read. But Tom's in the chat. He's keeping us updated right now. He says, we'll see if Julian shows up. The Saturday morning flight plans has the staff a little nervous. I mean, how would you like to be Kurt Cignetti or Sinceri or Deion or Lincoln Riley? And I'm just using Julian Lewis as an example, but just recruiting a top-tier quarterback right now in this day and age of college football. It's got to be bananas, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, you've sat in the chair on the other side. I mean, what is it
I'd
like?
I'd be so fed up. But here's the thing: you have to have like the stream of consciousness that I think this is what happened last year with Miami and Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward turned a lot of people off. I think he turned off Ohio State. I think he turned off Florida State. You could go down the line. And what I've always admired about Mario was his ability to kind of sift through that and keep the main thing, and the bottom line, and say, like, does this guy help us at the end of the day? I'm willing to kind of sort through all that stuff to get this guy here. And obviously they've been rewarded for that. So I think patience at the end of the day, ultimately, when you want to get it done. But if this guy helps your team win, ultimately it's for the better, right? So you just got to do what you got to do. All right, Drew. Next category here, bold prediction less than a month out from signing day.
Mine kind of piggybacks right on this conversation. All right, I wrote down unexpected top 10 quarterback flips, and then I put in parentheses something that is not already being discussed, right? So Julian Lewis would not qualify. Bryce Underwood would not qualify because he's already being linked to Michigan. Top 10 in the quarterback rankings, just a refresher for everyone. You see it right there. Bryce Underwood, Tavian St. Clair, locked in with Ohio State. Keelan has already flipped from SMU. Deuce Knight has already flipped to from Notre Dame to Auburn. Matt Zollers, he's been linked to Penn State. Jaron Kiwa Sagapatelli, I got to get that right before signing day. Georgia's involved, Oregon's involved, and then Antoine Hill down there. Remember, Cooper, he was committed to Colorado. I feel like we forget about that. So I said something that hasn't been discussed already. Really, I got two names highlighted. Hassan Longstreet with Texas A&M and Malik Washington at Maryland. Hassan, by no indications, I mean, maybe Tom Lloyd has a better idea. Like, I don't think he's looking around. So really, this comes down to Malik Washington. And Coop, why I said this, the past 3 years, a big-time signal caller has flipped at the buzzer. Last year, it was Dylan Raiola, Georgia and Nebraska. He didn't take an official visit to Lincoln until the month of December. The year before that, Dante Moore flipping from Oregon to UCLA. The year before that, Devin Brown, USC to Ohio State. He took a few different visits there in November. But I think one of these guys, especially once that coaching carousel gets spinning, we could see someone take a swing at a Malik Washington or a Hussam Longstreet. Teams in the market for a quarterback. Oregon, we know that they want two of them. They got Achilles Smith committed. Penn State, what are they going to do? Clemson, Dabo, what's he going to do? Florida, who knows with Billy Napier's future? I think it's hard to get a big arm in with DJ Lagway and what he's doing as a freshman, but they still need a quarterback. We saw that this past weekend, having to start a walk-on Yale transfer, or not start, but play him in a key moment. And then Ole Miss, they don't have a quarterback as well. So to me, there's a lot of potential people looking for an arm, and there's some arms that they might try to make a run at.
Yeah, kind of weird that Penn State is not on Malik Washington. I have not figured out what they're doing at quarterback or what they're trying to do from a recruiting standpoint. Drew, for me, I guess because we are kind of, in the swing of things with the election stuff, there's a pathway for Oregon, right? Pathway being the key word to get a top 5 spot. I don't think they get there, but you look at the meat kind of left on the bone. DJ Pickett, do they flip him, right? Miami's another school kind of involved there. Lincoln Cure, I think maybe that one's a little bit more realistic. Jakeem Stewart. And then you mentioned it, Sagapulotele, which you made sound very Italian, which is very impressive. I don't know how you did that. But I think ultimately, Jaron Kiowa Sagapulotele, currently committed to Cal, finds his way to Oregon. I think that happens. Obviously, strong Hawaiian ties, very close with Dylan Gabriel as well. And then, as our friend Tom has said, Oregon is one of those teams you got to watch out for a guy like Jakeem Stewart. So, yes, there is a pathway to a top 5 finish for Dan Lanning. And there's probably somebody out there, Drew, that, I'm not even mentioning that Oregon's working on right now. I think ultimately at the end of the day, they probably finish around 6 or 7, but that's kind of my big takeaway in terms of bold prediction. Guys, just a reminder, you're locked into the 105. You can find us every Monday and Wednesday. Monday on the CBS Sports Network at 2 o'clock Eastern. Wednesday right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel at 1 o'clock Eastern. Also, wherever you find your podcast, make sure to subscribe and like to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys listening as always. And Drew, we're going to run through this very quickly. Transaction wire. And Georgia just doing what Georgia does, just goes out to California and just kind of cherry picks their favorite guy like they do every year. And this time it was 2026 top 247 receiver Vance Spafford, a little bit of a darling. This kid, 5'10", 168, Drew, 4.35, 10.69, one fastest man at UA Future 50. This dude can absolutely roll, but he's not just like a speedster. He's going to be operating out of the slot at Georgia. Man, he's got a good feel, the suddenness, the initial quickness. Like he's a good football player that can also run fast. I'm not surprised by this at all. They just feel like they kind of have a want and a need for this type of dude every year.
I think what stands out about Vance, man, he finds the end zone, 36 touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. And it's not a bunch of the same thing, right? You turn on the highlight tape. Yeah, there's some deep shots, but he'll take a screen, race past a bunch of defenders. I think my big question with him is going to be, all right, physicality in the SEC. You said he just 168 pounds. We were around him at the Future 50. He's going to have to bulk up a little bit. But I think at Georgia, that's the perfect spot, perfect opportunity for him. I'm sure the Ladd McConkey comps are going to be going crazy here. That's a name that's going to be brought up a lot. Here's one. How about like Elijah Moore, his days at Ole Miss? I think he's a future slot merchant, and he fits what Georgia wants to do on offense, right? Did you see Sokovi White on Saturday got a target, the true freshman for Georgia? Another kind of one of these guys on the smaller side, but super explosive. Georgia seems to like that type in that offense.
Yeah, something about that Vance Spafford guy kind of reminds me of Ladd McConkey, kind of reminds me of London Humphrey, kind of reminds me of Landon Rowland. I mean, holy smokes, man, every single year. I wonder why. All right, Texas 2026 commit. Is it Zealous?
Yeah.
Zealous Hicks. I'm glad I got that right. Hopefully I did. We got Tom in the chat correcting all our pronunciations. Carrollton High School, he reclassifies from 26 to 25. Drew, diving in on him, big, long, rangy, safety, plays the boundary, physical and run support. Kind of reminds me of Benjamin Perry. Remember him at Louisville, coming out of Illinois? That was kind of the name that came to my mind.
Yeah, so he reclassifies. I mean, he was, I don't know what, safety 4 or 5 for us in 2026. Now keeps the 90 overall grade, safety number 29 overall with the reclassification. Hopefully, we're going to get him at the Under Armour All America game. I believe he is committed to that. Kid that first caught my eye at the FBU freshman All American game 2 years ago, right? He was big then. He was big and long then. To me, question with him, all right, can he cover, right? Can he run? I think in terms of an angular player, getting up into the alley from that boundary roll, like you said, he's really good at open field tackler. I wouldn't, consider him a true kind of like sledgehammer of a safety just yet. But the Longhorns, I get the take. Jonah Williams, the other safety for them, I get why they kind of got him to reclassify. I think he's someone where he's going to need to buy in there in Austin, but he could hit and be a multi-year starter in that secondary. So very interested to see. I think the true top end gear to run with guys in the deeper third, but they might not ask him to do much of that. So another notable kind of reclassification. Interested to see how this one shakes out. There's been like 3 or 4 safeties that have made this same move. Demetrius Samuel was another one that have reclassified. So, we've said it. It's not going away. We're only going to get more and more reclassifications.
I know you're all over it too, right? Like we're tracking all these guys case study wise to kind of see what it looks like position by position. This would be another one that kind of goes into that experiment as well. All right, Drew, from a transfer portal standpoint, I'll kind of cook on this one. Jade Maeva getting his first start for USC, the transfer from UNLV, the true sophomore. 11 games started already, 17 games played. Last year, over 3,000 yards passing. He had a 17 touchdown to 10 TD to INT ratio, Drew, this kid is super intriguing. When you turn on the tape, you get flashes of like, oh, this is kind of what people thought DJ Uiagalelei was going to be at big 6'4", 230-pound frame, elite arm talent. You see the timing, you see the anticipation. Obviously, the decision-making has to get better. He's got to protect the football, 10 interceptions, too much last year. But even when you watch the limited snaps that he's had at USC, there's some excitement for me over the next couple weeks to kind of see what he can bring to the table for Lincoln Riley, because I think he's a super talented kid. I think this guy is a Sunday player all the way. I just want to know how long the leash is, and as he auditions for the starting spot going forward, is it going to be enough for Lincoln Riley to kind of stay pat going into next year, that say, all right, I'm riding with this dude. This is my guy, which is kind of what they did a little bit with Miller Moss. Obviously, they brought in Maeva, but Maeva is this big kind of dripping with tools type of kid, right? So excited about him. I tweeted about it earlier, man, but I really kind of interested to see, like, all right, can they play Notre Dame close? Can they win that game? Like, can this kid kind of do some things, right? So fascinated with him. The other kid, off the market already. Hopefully I'm saying this right. Bangli Kamara from South Carolina. Only played 4 games this year, Drew. Graduate transfer, played 4 years at Pittsburgh before that. You turn on the tape, and I remember Shane Beamer talking about this. He played 4 games. They were starting to scale up his snaps, and this kid kind of flashes all over the tape, sideline to sideline. Talk about key and diagnose ability, his ability to come downhill. He's a good athlete in terms of sifting through traffic in the tackle box. He's got a pretty good feel for that. This guy's a really good example of like Kansas sitting there, probably in a good spot. This kid coming out of Pitt last year, I'm interested to see what the market would have looked like. But now he's on his 3rd school in 3 years, and Kansas is going to get him, I would assume, at a much lower cost than they would have got him a year ago, right? Now, the downside of that is you don't know. You don't know where this kid is. I mean, he was starting to get more playing time. He was playing well, and then all of a sudden he's out of there at South Carolina. This is his last shot at Kansas. I'm kind of interested to see how this works out, Drew, because this is one of those transfer portal entries where I'm like, yeah, we got an 86 rating on him. But if this dude goes out and is a tackling machine, is a super productive, winnable plus, almost conference level Big 12 type of backer, I would not be shocked at that at all. So I'm I'm kind of interested to see how some of these teams are going to play the transfer portal. And if I'm Kansas, man, like I kind of love this, you know.
Hey, on my Ava, I love how you use the term auditioning. I feel like it's the NFL now, right? You got the veteran quarterback, or the day 3 selection that's been sitting there into the season. You kind of throw him into the fire. Look, USC needs him to kind of be a guy, because what happens to Miller Moss now? Does he enter the transfer portal? USC didn't sign a quarterback last cycle. Malachi Nelson has transferred to Boise State. And Julian Lewis is looking around. So USC could be one of the most active teams in the quarterback market here in about 4 or 5 weeks, because they might have just one scholarship arm in Los Angeles. I mean, Lincoln Riley, quarterback whisperer. Very interesting to see the what that room's going to look like, because numbers are extremely low.
Yeah, and conversation happened in the chat is, is Miller Moss playing that bad? No, I don't think so. I think USC is at the point, though. Lincoln Riley's got to shake something up, see if he can spark this team, get some momentum kind of going into the next season. You got a guy right there who's a little bit of a firecracker. I mean, he is a wild card, right? Can he play more consistently? And if he can, then you got something in Jaden Maeva. All right, Drew, let's get out on this note right here from Speezy Gaming. Not even a question, just a comment. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. Dion winning right now. All I can say is signing day coming with some fireworks. What do you think? Think we're getting fireworks outside of, let's say they flip Julian Lewis? Outside of Julian Lewis, do you expect there to kind of be a last minute push there with Colorado?
I mean, that would be a question for Tom. They win on Saturday, right? Texas Tech. I think that's a winnable opponent. I think the Colorado noise is going to ramp all the way back up. They're going to be all up in the headlines. I think, and a few months ago we mentioned, okay, the roster reconstruction there in Boulder, what's it going to look like? Are they going to retain Jordan Seaton? I would assume that I mean, there's just so many variables, kind of like moving parts, where you could talk yourself into a situation where they're going to run it back. I don't know who on the commit list, like I would kind of circle as someone Dion has sunk his teeth into, but he kind of moves in silence, right? He isn't. It's kind of like
you're not a firm believer like in the home visits and all that type of stuff. That's not really what they. It's not really what they do. And to his credit, I mean, they've shown to have some effectiveness there. Now you can argue, with the variance that they tap into the high school side. But they've been able to kind of reel in some big fish, some guys that are playing well for them, like Draylon Miller, kind of come to mind a little bit. Who was the other kid last year out of Georgia? Michael.
Yeah, I don't think Michael's played.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. But yes, if Colorado continues to do what they're doing, I do think they're going to be able to take advantage of that. All right, Drew, any final thoughts? Almost an hour here before we get out of here.
No, I've unloaded the clip, man. Big weekend.
All right. Well,
big weekend of football on deck.
Big weekend of football on deck. We appreciate you guys watching as always. We're excited. Baby Ivins, less than 30 days away. We're excited for that. New member of the 105 family. Freaking pumped. That jacks me up. Guys, like I said, you can find us on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. You can also find us on Monday on CBS Sports Network and wherever you find your podcasts. Like I said, subscribe, leave a review, 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, comment. We appreciate it as always. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.